what we mean when we're using words like critically endangered or vulnerable or threatened, those are just different levels of risk for this population. So I actually have a picture that I wanted to show you guys. So this is the IUCN Red List category. So we keep throwing that around. This is basically, there may be some larger risks that this animal is encountering, maybe habitat loss, things like that. But again, still not as big of a risk. And then underneath threatened, this is our three big categories. So we have vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. Those three categories are all listed under threatened. Those are just different stages. So unfortunately today the animal we're going to meet is critically endangered, and that means that they are very, very close. So extinct in the wild means there are none left found in the wild. They may be found in zoos or as pets, but extinct means they're gone forever. So that's kind of an explanation of what we mean when we're talking about these different levels. And today we're going to meet, again, a critically endangered animal that many of you may recognize because although their wild counterparts are critically endangered, they are very commonly found in some households throughout the world because they are kept as pets. We're actually going to meet with Jerry, the long-tailed chinchilla. So Jerry's going to come out and hang out in this pen we've set up here, demonstrate a few of his natural adaptations, and we're going to talk a little bit about why his friends in the wild are so threatened. So I'm going to get him out and get him ready, and we'll get started. All right. We're going to bring Mr. Jerry down here. We've got quite a fun setup for him today. So again, Jerry is a long-tailed chinchilla. We're going to let him sniff around. Of course, he's going to run right underneath me. All right. So long-tailed chinchillas, as I mentioned, are often kept as pets. And in fact, the ones that we have here at Elmwood were ex-pets. So they were in someone's home before they came to live with us at the zoo. But in the wild, they are found in Chile, in South America. So they are not native to the United States. They come from South America, but not the warm parts of South America. They actually come from some pretty cold areas. They live in the Andes Mountains. And the Andes Mountains can get really cold at nighttime, so you'll see they have very, very thick fur. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that fur and about what Jerry's doing right now. But so they're found in South America, in the Andes Mountains, but they have been domesticated, which means they have lived with people and are kept as pets for about 100 years now. So they were actually first domesticated in the 1920s, so they were brought back from Chile and South America, and people started to breed them in captivity. And because of their size, you know, they were easy to keep in homes. But they're not always the easiest pet to have. So they've been living in our homes as pets for a long time. They've also been bred for the fur trade. So unfortunately, the long-tailed chinchilla is critically endangered in the wild for a couple different reasons. A big one that really hit this population hard, starting all the way back in the 1700s, is the fur trade. So chinchilla fur is extremely soft, and therefore it's very valuable and highly desired for human clothes. So unfortunately, you can see Jerry's pretty small, so it takes a whole lot of chinchillas to make a piece of clothing. In fact, it takes over 100 to make one fur coat. So unfortunately, when their first started to become popular, they were hunted without any kind of protective measures, without any kind of limits on how many could be taken out of the wild, and they were hunted nearly to extinction. So, you know, they'd been hunted for a long, long time, but in the 1700s to the 1900s, their population declined about 90%. So there were hardly any left. And thankfully, in the early 1900s, right around the same time they were brought back to be kept as pets to start being domesticated, they were protected in their natural habitat. Now, the fur trade is not so much of an issue for wild chinchillas anymore, but things like habitat loss and mining, so in the areas where they're naturally found, people might be mining for minerals and different elements. They also are often farming and ranching in those areas, so they compete with a lot of different things that want to be, or that people that want to use that space that often is used as a chinchilla home. And chinchillas do need a decent amount of space. They can often live in colonies of over 100 individuals. So Jerry actually does not live by himself at the zoo. We've talked a lot about animals and whether they're social or if they like to live by themselves. Jerry actually lives with 2 other chinchillas here, but in the wild they can live with a group of over 100. And these colonies are actually female dominated. So the females are larger and they're kind of in charge. So they usually establish the territories and get to pick where their burrows are, because this is a burrowing species. They do like to hide in the cracks and crevices. So their large colonies do rely on each other for finding food and taking care of the young and things like that. So chinchillas are very social species. Now, we've seen him rolling around in this dust. We talked about how valuable chinchilla fur is, but why is that? So their fur is much more thick and dense than our hair. So if you were to take a look at your arm, you might see that there's some little hairs on there, and each one of those hairs comes out of its own follicle or hole. So on a chinchilla, they have about 50 to 60 hairs coming out of each of those follicles. So we only have 1 per follicle. Chinchillas can have 50 to 60 per follicle. So it's really thick and really dense. And that's because they have to stay warm on those mountainsides in the cold, in the Andes Mountains. And they also are going to use that fur to kind of protect their bodies when they're squeezing around in those rock crevices and things like that. So they look really fluffy, but they're actually pretty small underneath that. So it insulates them, but it also allows them to kind of scurry away, and if an animal tries to grab them, they can squeeze out of that really easily. Now that dust is actually how Jerry takes good care of his fur. So because their fur is so thick and dense, they can't take a bath like you and I do. So he can't really jump in the shower and use shampoo and conditioner. Unfortunately, if his hair gets completely soaked, it takes a really long time to dry off. And unfortunately, that means that bacteria and fungus and really gross stuff can grow on their skin and in their hair, and they can get really sick if they get completely soaking wet. So instead of using water and soap, they will use dust. And this dust is very fancy dust. This is actually volcanic ash, so it's very fine. And what they'll do is they roll around on that dust, and it clings to the oils and the dirt and all the other particles in their hair that they want to get off. So they'll roll in that dust, they'll roll in that dirt, and then they shake really, really, really fast, and it throws off all the stuff they don't want in there. So they actually take care of their fur. Instead of using a bath with water, they use a bath with dust. Now you may notice Jerry's very excited in exploring. He's a very fast animal. These guys are really excellent at navigating their mountain habitats. They have big toes with big foot pads on the bottom there compared to the rest of the size of their feet, and they can grip really well. They're also excellent jumpers. So he has really strong back legs, and he can jump from rock to rock, and he could actually jump about 3 feet high in the air. So he could jump over our fence here if he's really motivated. We're hoping that Jerry wants to hang out with us inside here today though. So those long, strong legs, those big feet and toe pads, those help him to navigate in a mountainous habitat. So remember, he lives in the Andes Mountains. And you can see that dust bath in action. We have to set up a tarp so we can keep it a little bit clean for the rest of us, since dust is not a really good way for us to take a bath at all at home. Now, Jerry, you'll notice, has pretty big whiskers on his face and pretty big ears. So those are different senses, different ways he uses his senses to navigate his home as well. So these guys are a prey species. That means they are hunted by other things. And that could be large mammals or large birds of prey in South America. So they have those super huge ears to help them listen. They can turn their ears a little bit and kind of listen in different directions. And they can use those whiskers to feel around. So when they're navigating their home, when they're crawling around or hopping around on those rocks, they may need to squeeze into a small space very quickly so that they can escape a predator. And those whiskers can actually tell them whether or not they will fit inside of a small space, because those whiskers stretch the whole width of their body. So he can actually tell if he has enough room to fit in a small hole based on whether his whiskers start to bend or not. Now he also has eyes on the side of his head, and those help him to see almost all around his body. So he can make sure there's nothing going to sneak up behind him. Remember, he is a prey species, wants to stay nice and safe. And of course, then they also have a really great sense of smell. So you can see his nose wiggling around quite a lot to try to find some snacks. I've got some sunflower seeds here today that he's munching on. They have really strong teeth. They're actually in the rodent family, so he's related to mice and rats and squirrels and chipmunks. And so because of that, he has those ever-growing teeth, those really strong teeth for chewing on stuff like sunflower seeds and bark and hay. So, he might be demonstrating again his dust bath behavior. So when chinchillas are dirty, they actually have to use dust instead of using water. Because of their fur being so thick, they can't take a bath like you and I do. So unfortunately, he can't use soap and water. He has to use dust. All right, guys, so I think we will start taking some questions now. I'm going to see if Jerry wants to come back up front here and visit a little closer so we can see him. So Michael wants to know, what kind of enrichment does Jerry get? That's a great question, Michael. So Jerry the chinchilla really loves to jump on stuff, and he also loves to chew on stuff. Remember, he's a rodent, so he needs to constantly be chewing to keep his teeth healthy. So we give him and his friends who he lives with, his 2 other chinchilla friends, we give them boxes, we give them different grasses. Today we actually have some green plants that we call browse. So this is honeysuckle. This is browse that he doesn't normally get, so that's a type of enrichment. And then he also likes to, again, hop on stuff. So we give him rocks and we give him little plastic containers to go through and hop onto. We also do some training with Jerry. He is target trained. I forgot his target stick today, unfortunately. But we work with him to do some different behaviors as enrichment too. So we try to mix things up, but they really love to chew and they really love to climb. Liam and Ronan would like to know, do they take a dust bath every day? And do they eat veggies or insects and meat or both? So dust baths for our chinchillas, they usually get them every other day. 3 times a week is generally the least amount that they'll do it. And it kind of depends on how active they are. So in the wild, they may take more or less baths depending on the availability of the dust and what they're getting into, how dirty they may get. Here at the zoo, we try to make sure they get at least a dust bath 3 times a week. They would do it all the time, all day, every day if we gave them the opportunity. And unfortunately, because they live with us in captivity, they can dry out a little bit too much, so we don't want them to overdo it. And as far as their diet, he is an herbivore for the most part. So these guys typically are going to eat grasses and seeds and flowers, different plants. But they have been on occasion known to eat insects and sometimes eggs from birds. So they do occasionally eat some meat. But we typically consider them an herbivore. All right, Lakea wants to know, do they bite? They can. So thankfully, Jerry's in a pretty good mood today, and I'm giving him a lot of space. I'm letting him run around and do what he wants, and only really approaching him when he comes closer to me. So we try to give our animals choice and options in their environment so that they feel safe. And you can see he's feeling very safe right now, hopping up on my leg. But he can bite. Any animal that has a mouth is capable of biting, and chinchillas are no exception to that. Avery would like to know, how long do they live? Great question, Avery. So in the wild, typically they live around 10 years. Which is actually pretty long for a small animal. If you think about it, small rodents don't usually have that long of a lifespan. We're actually finding that living with humans in a zoo setting or as a pet, they can live upwards of 20 years. So they have a really long lifespan, which is a great thing to consider if you are thinking about bringing a chinchilla home as a pet. So just like so many of the other animals we've talked about on Zoo School, it's always important to know what you're getting into before you decide to bring a pet into your life. Chinchillas are no exception. They can live a long time. They're also nocturnal, which means that he can be active at nighttime when you're trying to sleep. So it's always important to know that when you have animals living in your home. And they like to chew. They need to chew to stay healthy, so they can be a bit destructive. So these guys can live about 10 to 20 years on average. Let's see, Grace wants to know, how many babies can they have? So typically they have 2 litters a year, so 2 groups of babies, and they can have up to 6 pups in each of those litters. And for Jerry here, he lives with other male chinchillas, so he's never had babies or never had a family necessarily, but in the wild they do reproduce twice a year and have upwards of 6 pups. Jodias wants to know, why do they have a bushy tail? Excellent question. So this is the long-tailed chinchilla, and it's kind of hard to tell from looking at him, but you may be able to see that his tail fur is longer, and it's actually more stiff or coarse. So remember, chinchillas like Jerry in the wild, they're going to live in the Andes Mountains. They're going to live on mountains where there's lots of rocks and boulders, and they have to run around and be very fast and kind of get in and out of small spaces. So that tail is very long. It's actually equal to about half his normal, like his regular body length. And that tail is going to help him to balance. So it has those long, coarse hairs. It's actually very stiff compared to the rest of his body. And it's going to help him to balance when he's running and when he's jumping. So that's why they have that kind of bushy, long tail. All right, Michael wants to know, what is Jerry's favorite food? Ooh, I have not given him his favorite food yet, but we can go ahead and try. So Jerry likes a lot of different kinds of snacks. He likes, he knows exactly what this snack is. He likes sunflower seeds, and he likes different flowers. He likes what we call dandelion drops, but his absolute favorite thing that we found lately are these dried strawberries. So we're going to let him munch on some of those. So he likes these little dried strawberries as he knocks them down. All right, Paige wants to know, are his claws sharp? Excellent question, Paige. They are not very sharp at all. Those claws are usually used for gripping and maybe a little bit of digging around, but they're not super sharp for grabbing or holding onto food or anything like that because he is a prey species. Alice wants to know, does he hibernate? They do not hibernate. So in their habitat in the wild, there's not going to be as severe of a temperature shift as we would have here in Pennsylvania, where the weather gets really cold certain times of the year and not as cold other times of the year. So they're not going to have to hibernate. They do burrow, and that's where they would spend some time to raise their babies and to sleep and stay safe, but they're not going to spend an extended period of time in there. Peggy wants to know, are they friendly? So yes, Jerry is very friendly. Jerry and his two friends, the other chinchillas we have here at the zoo, have lived with humans their whole life, so they are very comfortable around people. And again, we work really hard to make sure Jerry has choice and enjoys his time out with the public, doing programs. So they are pretty friendly, and we actually, when the zoo is open, we offer a very special Elmwood encounter called a Chinchilla treatment. So if you're having a really rough time, once we reopen, you can come and visit Jerry and our other two chinchillas, Pichu and Tom, and get the Chinchilla treatment, which basically consists of a program like what I'm doing right now, where you get to kind of hang out with them. All right, Luke wants to know, what are their predators? Great question, Luke. So in their habitat, larger mammals are going to hunt for them, so things like foxes, and then of course birds of prey, and humans actually are more of their predator than anything, because remember, they were hunted in the wild extensively at one point for their soft fur, and then of course collected for the pet trade, and in some places they are eaten. So humans are one of their largest predators. Maya wants to know, can they be pets? Yes, you can keep a chinchilla as a pet. They have been domesticated and raised for the pet trade since the 1920s. However, remember, there are a lot of special things that chinchillas do, like run around at nighttime. They are nocturnal. They have to chew all the time because they are rodents. They have special teeth that they need to wear down, so they can chew things you don't want them to, like your shoes, like Jerry was just trying to do right now. And they need a lot of different activities. You can see he's a very active animal. He's running, he's jumping, so you can't really keep them in a small space. You need a pretty big space to give them proper exercise. So they can be kept as pets, but it's very important to know everything about them before you decide on one. And they can live upwards of 20 years, don't forget that. All right, Emma Rose would like to know, who are his chinchilla friends? So we have 3 chinchillas here at the zoo. We have Jerry, and then we have Tom, who is his companion. They came to us together from kind of the same place. And then we also have Pichu, who's our older chinchilla. So Jerry and Tom are 2 younger of them. All right, Julia wants to know what's the difference between a chinchilla and a rabbit. That's an excellent question. Oftentimes when we first bring out our chinchillas for programs, sometimes people get a little confused because they do have very similar appearance to rabbits. So chinchillas and rabbits are in different groups. Remember, chinchillas are rodents, whereas rabbits are lagomorphs. Now, their teeth structure is very similar. They are going to be chewing all the time, and they're going to be needing to wear down their teeth, but they are in completely separate animal groups. But they do have large ears, large eyes, kind of similar structure. And this is probably because they are both prey species. They both need to protect themselves from other animals, and they're both herbivores for the most part. So sometimes you see animals that look similar or have similar adaptations just because they have had to evolve to fit a certain type of habitat or a certain niche, and that might be very similar to another animal in another area. All right. Aiden wants to know the difference between a chinchilla and a hamster. So again, kind of the same answer, but hamsters are rodents, so they are more closely related to our friend Jerry, but hamsters are usually not going to have as long of a tail, and they may not be as hoppy or as fast. So hamsters are more ground-dwelling, whereas our friend Jerry is really good at hopping across rocks and things like that. They're a little better at jumping. He's really enjoying his bath. Phoebe wants to know, do they come in other colors besides white? Yes, so naturally chinchillas are not this color. In the wild, you don't see a lot of white animals that would live on the ground because it's really hard to camouflage if you're all white and you live on the ground. So typically in the wild, they're going to be kind of a bluish gray color, maybe a little bit bluish brown. But because chinchillas have been raised to be kept as pets, and they have been bred by humans for many, many years, we get a lot of different color variations. So Jerry is all white. We have another one named Tom, who's kind of a dusky brownish gray. And then we have Pichu, who's our older one. He's a dark blue gray. So they come in a variety of colors. All right, guys, we're going to do 3 more questions. So Tyler in New Jersey wants to know, what is the largest weight of a chinchilla? So on average, the males, so Jerry is a male, weigh about 1 pound. Females can be a little bit heavier than that in the wild, but I guess the largest one was over 3 pounds. 3 pounds is a lot for a chinchilla. That is a pretty chunky chinchilla. Jerry, you can see, is very active, so he's a very fit chinchilla. So 3 pounds is the heaviest chinchilla. All right, Kimberly wants to know, are they territorial? Yes, very territorial. So remember I said they live in big colonies sometimes. Sometimes there's over 100 of them in that colony, and the females are actually the more dominant gender. So the females kind of rule the roost, and they will start fights with other females to defend territory and claim burrow space and things like that. So they can be very territorial. Thankfully for us, our 3 chinchillas get along pretty well, although at nighttime we do separate some of them out so that they can have some private time. All right, and last question. Deb would like to know, is there a law prohibiting people from using them for fur? There is. So in the wild, they are protected. They're pretty heavily protected now because there was such a major decline due to the fur trade and the pet trade. So I do not believe you are legally able to hunt them for their fur anymore. However, in its place, there is a captive breeding program for chinchillas. And they are raised now for those different fur trades, but they are protected in the wild. So if you are concerned about things like that, you can always make choices in your life to buy sustainable materials, buy things that are not made from live animal fur. You can get synthetics that are very similar, but also, just know where your clothing and things come from. All right, last question. Are Tom and Jerry brothers? No, they're not true brothers, but they did come to us from at the same time. And yes, they are named after the cartoon characters, Tom and Jerry. So they are not true brothers, but they did live together before they came to the zoo. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in with Jerry. Make sure, if you are able to, visit our website and check out some other activities, and of course donate to our emergency fund. And then Facebook has this new setup with stars where you can actually donate stars or give stars to us during the live broadcast, and we receive a portion of the proceeds. So it's an easy way. If you don't feel like going over to our emergency fund, you can actually give us stars on Facebook, and we get some of that money back. All right, so make sure you tune in tomorrow and the rest of the week and have a great rest of your day, everybody.